Hello, my name is Michael Portas. Welcome to our, we believe, 27th podcast, though I guess we're at the point now where we're starting to lose track, which is pretty exciting. But I'm joined today, speaking of exciting, by one of our newest administrators, actually I believe our newest administrator, Mr. David Raffo, who is the assistant principal here at PV. We're currently seated in his office, which I like how he's rearranged it, so kudos there. And thanks for joining us today.
I appreciate it. Thank you for having me.
Excellent. It is kind of unusual, I suppose, that in your first 4 weeks on the job that the superintendent reaches out to you and asks you if you want to do a podcast. I don't suspect there are too many answers other than yes, but you were very enthusiastic, yes. So
my options may have been limited in that initial conversation.
Yes, they were, in full disclosure. But we're glad you joined us. I think it's really great, not only for the PV community to get to hear your voice and see your face and get to know who you are, but I think also for the elementary school parents who will be sending their kids here, whether next year or in years thereafter, to start to get an idea for who you are, what makes you click, and kind of get that human, viewpoint of who you are as a professional and also as a person. So I appreciate it, and hopefully this gets a lot of positive attention. Yeah, so my first question to you, Mr. Raffo, is please tell us about your background as an educator and how your journey has brought you here to Pequannock.
Yeah, thank you. So it was interesting as I'm thinking about this question. I had a unique experience about less than a month ago in my parents' basement, which is, I still have some things there after we made a couple of transitions. And I came across my yearbook. And as I think about my own experience as a high school kid, and many of us may relate to this, you may have thought that you didn't have really a clear vision of what you wanted to do at the time. And as I'm sifting through the pages, I thought the same thing. I was like, senior year of high school, how much did I really know what direction I wanted to go and how I wanted to ultimately serve a community? And I actually found my digital version of my yearbook, which is on the screen here, and it asks for your activities, your future plans, and then your memories. And my future plans is very succinct. It goes college, history teacher, coach a basketball team. Nice. So that kind of just reiterated sort of my inspiration for getting into our profession and ultimately why I'm sitting here with us today. I had a 9th grade world history teacher, Mr. Clays, who actually ended up becoming the principal of the high school that I attended years later. And he was the one who really inspired me about education, about the content, but ultimately about building meaningful connections with people. And at that time, with kids. So that was kind of the start of envisioning where I wanted my life to go and ultimately how I could really make a contributing factor to a community that I would be destined to ultimately support, which is why I'm sitting here in Pequannock. Fast forward some years after school, that kind of vision sort of came into fruition. I kind of have I kind of look at it as like 3 segments or 3 buckets of my career. That first bucket, I had the opportunity of serving as a teacher and a supervisor in a number of different communities who were ultimately urban communities, at-risk communities. I served in the city of Newark for many years, the city of Passaic, and I actually had an opportunity to work at the first boarding public charter school in the country in Southeast DC when I was going for my master's degree. So you could imagine what that looks like on a Monday morning or a Tuesday morning when kids have been living on campus with each other in middle school, and some of the challenges that you might face there in the discipline office or in the administrative offices. So, I kind of have that bucket of experience. Which is pretty diverse. I also bring to Pequannock the private sector. I had the opportunity of working with a company, as a for-profit educational company called Innovative Designs for Education under Dr. Nancy Sula. That gave me a real open window into possibilities of education and what classrooms and what teaching and learning can look like. that brought me into a lot of different places across northern New Jersey, Bergen County, Morris County, across New York City, New York State. We were even doing some consulting, virtual consulting, when we went into the pandemic via Zoom with districts in Florida, in California. So that allowed me to really kind of brush shoulders with literally hundreds of teachers in dozens of school districts. And that just gave me a lot of perspective as an educator. That ultimately led me to my most recent position as a vice principal at Barringer High School in Newark. And now I sit here today. And it was incredible going through the interview process with yourself and Principal Seborowski and a number of other administrators and faculty and families across Pequannock. And I kind of felt like, I desired to be in Pequannock, and I hope, as I sit here today, that Pequannock kind of wanted me in this position. And, I have, family who live in the community. I have ties to the community. And I always found that the values that our families have here is very reflective of the values of myself and my family and how I want to instill that in my children as well. So I'm thrilled to be here. It's been a 3 or 4 week journey for me, and I'm just excited to see where it takes us.
Excellent. Yeah, and definitely in the interview process, it really is a two-way recruiting opportunity where you know that you have all these different stakeholders, and I'm really happy with the process that we have. So parents had a chance to meet you in the interview process, as well as other candidates, as did our staff, as did the administrative team, and I was there on the tail end. So obviously you fared quite well, otherwise you wouldn't be sitting here. If we ran into each other, it's a vague chance I'd recognize you, but not so great. But you impressed us, and we impressed you, so it's really great to hear. And I'm not going to pursue it, but if I were to find my yearbook, I'm pretty sure I'd be like, did I look good in 1989? So the haircut was pretty forgettable, and probably most of what I said. I think at that point, I thought I'd be the next lead singer for Van Halen if Sammy Hagar didn't work out, but that option never really presented itself. But that's great, though, that you had that sense, because I think a lot of us as educators, I joke as I might, I think we have something in us early on where we hear that calling of being able to help other people, and it's a very powerful drive. Yeah. And one of the fun things for me in these podcasts is, as you're answering things, I'm reflecting a lot of my experiences. And I actually tried coming out of college not to be a teacher. And I worked in the private sector for a couple of years. Did not work for an educational firm. I actually worked for Nabisco, which was a great gig for a guy in his early 20s. But I always heard those voices of, are you doing what you should be doing? Are you making a difference for humanity? Yeah. And that's what brought me here. And I'm thrilled, and I'm glad that our paths intersect.
You mentioned that it's like always the desire to sort of find meaning and purpose. Yeah. I couldn't relate to that more.
Yeah. And I tell people in interviews, and I'm interviewing people now for some of our positions who are younger than one of my kids, and telling them, this is my 28th year in the field, and I still find the job incredibly fulfilling. And I do enjoy coming to work. I have to do a lot of things that aren't necessarily enjoyable, but that's part of the gig, is why they pay me. But there's a level of fulfillment. It definitely sounds like you're feeling that, and hopefully that continues to just radiate throughout you and your work over however many years you're part of the team here. Yeah. So that sounded like I was actually wrapping things up, but I'm actually just trying to make a segue question too. What are some of the things that you've noticed about PV in the district in your first 4 weeks here? And it's tough to really assess things over the course of 4 weeks. Really need about 100 days to get a really strong idea. So I'm aware that most of what you say now, if you watch this again late April, you'll be like, oh, I should have said that. But with that in mind, initial impressions, what have you picked up on so far?
Yeah. What was nice is I had the opportunity in November and December to also take just kind of 2 site visits across the day, and had a shadowing experience, and then got to meet and greet all the faculty and the kids. And this word, I think, gets overused. I know that it gets used. I'm a big Giants fan. It gets used in the NFL a lot. But culture, that word really resonates with me. And as I mentioned, I had this opportunity to serve a lot of different districts in even the as an outsider, right, in this consulting process. So I was able to visit a lot of middle schools, a lot of elementary schools. And in school, what I find is like culture can actually be like palpable. You can literally walk into a building and feel it. You can hear it. And Pequannock Valley has strong culture. Again, this is my honeymoon period. This is my blink, as you mentioned. But the staff, the way that the staff interact with one another in very informal ways, right? Just laughter in the hallways between peers and between our colleagues. The way that Principal Seborowski interacts with our entire faculty, our custodians, everybody. I get the immediate sense that everybody here is ultimately here for the right reasons, and it's in the best interest of children.
Absolutely.
So that's one thing that I found, in as well as with our kids. The assistant principal's office can be this space of, it could be a little disconcerting, or when a kid gets called down to the main office or has these conversations early on, particularly as I'm a fresh face to them. But our kids have a great sense of pride for the community that they're in. I believe wholeheartedly that almost all of them really feel at home at Pequannock Valley. And that, again, stems from leadership. That stems from teachers. That stems from the families in the community. So that culture is something that's really stuck out to me my first couple weeks here. And then even like the connectivity to the community. We have many staff members who reside in the community. I'm a big fan of making sure that we connect to local businesses and organizations, and I've seen that here where our teachers have vested relationships with our families. And so that connectivity really ties back to that cultural piece. And one thing that I've mentioned, and even with our tech team, with Matt Shea and his team, is the levels of expertise, and Allison Noon as well, the levels of expertise and competency that I've experienced since coming here. Putting an IT ticket in, and then within a couple of hours having a personal conversation with an IT tech. The competency that Principal Seborowski has, our teachers. There's a lot of years of experience here. There's a lot of just a lot of expertise. So that is something that I've been kind of consumed with, and it's a beautiful thing to feel as though you can turn to the person to the left or to the person to the right, no matter what their role is, and they have great knowledge base, great buy-in, and knowledge of the culture here, the community. So those are just a couple of things for my first kind of blink responses that I have for what has hit me when I've come to Pequannock Valley.
Yeah, and that's a great point. I hadn't really considered that. I wrote the question, but I hadn't really considered that aspect of it. And I love to hear what you're saying about the culture, because I agree with you. To use your word, it is palpable. You go into any building, you can sense the level of care. When I used to coach basketball, I would go scout in other buildings, and within the first 5 seconds of being in a place, I could get a sense of how much they really cared about their school, and really, I guess I'm saying ethos about it. But you walk into a classroom, you feel the energy that the kids and the staff are giving off, and it's something when you've been in education or really any field, you definitely sense it. There's something that it's magnetic, it pulls you in, and I'm glad that you pointed out too what goes on in the hallways. And in the hallways can be a place of great chaos. And as a school administrator, they're not really our favorite place, especially during passing time, but they also present an opportunity for people to do the simple things like greeting each other and actually caring enough to make eye contact, say hi. And I remember reading a few years ago in a study that schools in which the principal greets students at the door perform at a higher level academically than do those where the principal doesn't do that, which seems like common sense. But I do think there's a causal relationship there, a culture of civility, a culture of kindness. And I honestly, I can't imagine a place where you wouldn't say hi to people. What do you gain from that? Yeah. And I like what you said about the IT department, and not just because Allison's in the room with us right now and they can edit anything I put out there and most likely make me look really dumb if they wanted to. But I feel like, there's this level of expertise and competence, but it also comes along with a degree of confidence that's so strong that they don't need to advertise. Like when you know somebody's really good at their job, they don't need to show off or anything like that. They don't have to put any airs. And so there's a grace and humility that comes with that level of, I believe, high performance. So I'm glad that you're detecting these things. And I enjoyed your response too. Obviously, you got me really thinking a lot too. So.
What's interesting is you bring up the greeting at the door. So we have our kiosk or our vestibule, and I'm not recreating the wheel. This isn't something that David Raffo has brought here, but Principal Seborowski has kind of tasked me as that's sort of my post in the morning, right?
Yep.
Greeting the kids there, even being outside by the Panther when it gets a little warmer. I try to strap on my coat and get out there, but it's been really cold recently. And I said to Principal Seborowski, one of my first days here, I said, I don't know that I have ever received so many thank yous and hellos from a group of kids on a single basis that I did that first or second day, and it's just continued. So it's great to see our kids exude that. It's great to see our staff exude that.
That's great. And it's funny, when I didn't come here till my 11th year as a teacher, and this is back in 2007. It was very unusual for teachers at that stage of their career to have any degree of mobility. That's changed over the past few years. But something that really drew me here was when I was offering SAT classes, and I was servicing students in Wayne and in Lake Park and Pequannock, and I would get these really nice emails from parents after the fact telling me, hey, my son went up X number of points. And I noticed that there was this pattern of appreciation. And I always wanted to get back to him and be like, you paid me to do this, right? Like, it wasn't charity. But it meant a lot because I could tell it meant a lot to them. So therefore it meant even more to me. Because you want to deliver with quality. And when people demonstrate that they appreciate it, to me it makes you want to deliver a little bit more.
Absolutely.
And so for the kids to demonstrate that's huge. And that's great because that makes you feel welcome, and they're the lifeblood of the school. The teachers are your foundation, but the kids are the lifeblood. And if you feel like there's a lot of reciprocal joy in seeing one another, it's tremendous. It makes work so much more fun.
Absolutely.
And work's not always fun, but again, as I said before, that's why they pay us to show them. All right, question number 3. Based on your initial observations, which you just spoke about, and research, and I threw that in there just because I knew you had researched the community, the school, quite thoroughly for your interview. What would you like to help us accomplish in the next 3 to 5 years in Pequannock? And I'll admit, 3 to 5 is kind of an arbitrary number, but it could be over the course of the next 2 years. But what do you see you being able to influence for our district?
So it's interesting. We mentioned earlier I have a Eisenhower matrix on the board here. So this isn't a response to this question. Some of that actually was in this not or important and not urgent section of that matrix. And when I saw this question, I think about this question. My mind goes into a number of different avenues. One thing I'm really passionate about is service-based learning. I think that ties into, further partnering with community, the local businesses, organizations. I kind of see those things kind of as twofold. How are we empowering our kids, and how are we curating units of study, or how are we curating kind of capstone projects, if you will, for 8th grade, to really have real world experiences. Whether that's, it could be, and that could look like anything. Having some of our kids who are artistic and visual go to a local business to see how they could partner with them to rebrand their logos. Whether it is, working with organizations, our police department, our fire department. I see in one of our local firehouses the volunteer sign kind of flashing that our fire department needs volunteers. Well, what do our 6th, 7th, and 8th graders have? What research, what knowledge do they have, and what ideas do they have in order to help the fire department promote having volunteers? So I think some of those things, they sound like they're not necessarily tied to curriculum, but there's ways that we could really embed true service-based learning experiences into our daily lessons and into our units of study.
Yeah.
And like I said, that could look like a capstone project for 8th grade, but that doesn't have to start just in 8th grade. That could start in its infancy here at PV and even beyond. So that was one thing for sure, that idea of service-based learning and the partnerships that I know that I'm really passionate about, and I know many of our kids are passionate about. We had a couple of 8th graders in the past week or two. We started to collect bottle caps in the cafeteria because one of our 8th grade, one of our parents can help us do some recycling projects there. So the 8th graders came to me. They said, "Hey, Mr. Raffo, we have this idea. We've done it in the past. We want to continue this." So I feel like for us as educators, seeing that drive, I want to harness that.
Yeah.
And what better way to build civic responsibility, to build learners who feel like they could literally change the world? Why can't that start in middle school? So that's something that I'm really thinking about in the next couple of years. How can I in any way support a process like that for some of our learners?
Yeah. And I have very much a high school mindset. I taught at the high school level for 14 years. So I associate a lot of capstone work with seniors. I like this idea of doing something that's an important culminating experience for 8th graders as well, because they're about to enter an important transition in their lives as well. So I like that long range way of thinking of things. And it's funny when you were talking about the artwork. When I used to go to different communities for travel baseball, I would try to take notes on whatever I saw in the coffee shops. And there were some places where kids' artwork was put up in businesses.
Yeah.
And it was just a nice little partnership between the school district and, if it was an independent coffee shop or it could be any type of retailer that just wants to have that association with kids. And there's something energizing about the work of kids and kids themselves, and I like the idea of associating a lot with the greater community.
In the cafeteria, sometimes I call it like Mr. Raffo's story time, where I'll kind of take a pause for a few minutes and share something that's happening out in the news or something that's happening locally. And I did challenge our 8th graders earlier this week and said, we're looking at continuing to build upon not necessarily service-based learning, but more like community service. And I said, if there's any ideas that all of you have, we want, as an administration, as a teaching staff, we want to hear from you. And, sitting down with a couple of our 8th graders at one of the tables, we talked about social media and their presence on social media. And could a student run a social media campaign for a nonprofit organization or things like that? So it's incredible when you get to sit down with kids and have these not divergent conversations, but sort of convergent, where it's like, we're talking about community service, we're talking about service-based learning. What do you think? Like, let's throw out ideas here. And to hear the little kind of pieces of schema that they have and these generative ideas, it's just like, it's incredible to see that unlocked, even into this a really informal conversation. Yeah,
and this kind of gets to a response that I was thinking of for the next question, but people fundamentally want to be heard. And as young people, for those of us who are adults in education, a lot of times our youth experiences are in the rearview mirror, but they're not so distant that we don't remember. But I can recall getting frustrated if I didn't feel like people cared about what I had to say, or I had ideas about things I wanted to express, but I didn't feel like I had the platform. So providing kids that opportunity, it's really important for them, and it helps them, I think, realize that their place in the world is important. Like, they matter. Like, they're relevant, and that we care, and that they can be shapeshifters at the age of 14. That's a pretty exciting thing.
Absolutely.
It's a great prospect. So I'm excited about that. You made mention too about the curriculum, and I think that's a really important thing to keep in mind as well, that the standards really guide the skills that we need our kids to develop, and the activities that result as a consequence of making sure that kids are imbued with those skills, those form the curriculum. And so if the experiences are service-based learning and they help them understand the importance of the speaking, listening standards or writing standards, whatever it might be, very, very important. So my last one's it's a challenging question, but I think it's one that, considering the fact I gave you like 4 days, you probably have a good answer for it. No pressure. But generally, an assistant principal doesn't get people when they're at their happiest, whether students, staff, or families. And you mentioned it. you call a kid down to the assistant principal's office. Rarely are you like, yeah, let's go. That's going to be fun. Can't wait. Like I'm trying to think of how many times my kids at the dinner table are like, oh, by the way, Dad, guess where I went today? And so generally the stuff that you have to deal with is not, it's not the sunshine, it's not the lollipops, sadly. But what can you share that might help all parties involved, whether students, staff, families, all the parties involved manage potentially difficult conversations or challenging situations? So it's in other words, things in the moment stink, but how can we make it work? How can we make sense of it? How do we resolve the proverbial stink?
Yeah, oftentimes when a meeting is set, or we know that there's a phone call that has to be made that is naturally going to be uncomfortable.
Yeah.
This is on my end, at least. I try to train myself to be comfortable in the uncomfortable, right? And prepare yourself to have courageous conversations. When having those phone calls or those situations arise, what I try to do to communicate with families and with kids is to really try to set like intentions initially when we're having this conversation. And it's not, it's never an I gotcha. Unfortunately, some of these challenging situations or conversations based upon the role of an assistant principal tend to deal with discipline.
Yeah.
And I have 3 children of my own. Those conversations for a family are not easy. And it's not necessarily always easy on my end either. But, when we're able to set intentions with our families and really kind of lay the groundwork to say, this conversation, albeit is going to be maybe uncomfortable, but this is why we're having it. We're setting intentions, right? The intention is growth. The intention is learning. And that could be, we always view learning through the academic lens in the classroom, but there's so much more to school other than the academic and curricular component. Like our kids and all of us, right, we can all relate, we make mistakes on a daily basis. We fail at times. We have lapses of judgment of times. So trying to really communicate with families, the intention about the conversation or about the situation is growth for their child, is growth for that child and then the students who are around them.
Yeah.
Can in some way kind of, I don't want to say utilize the term disarm, but kind of just ease the tensions in the room, if you will, to have some of those more growth mindset conversations. And, making sure, one thing that I've harped on with our kids, not necessarily with our families, but with our kids is, we talk about like ownership in this building, and Principal Seborowski has reiterated that, and I talk to our kids about that a lot, is, sometimes it's so easy for us to not have our focus on what we did, but on what others had done around us. And, I try to really have those conversations with our kids is, we're having a conversation, you and I, let's focus on the you portion of this. Sure, there's other circumstances that are around you that may have impacted a choice, that may have impacted the decision you make, but let's really hone in on your ownership of this situation. And then once we could do that, that then gives us the opportunity to be honest, gives us the opportunity to create a plan in place and to ultimately grow from the situation.
Yeah. And early in my administrative career, I used to call them the 22-minute, 3-minute conversations, because there were conversations that ultimately could have taken 3 minutes, but they took 22 because there was so much more that maybe the parent was bringing to the table about things that they were concerned about or they were worried about. And I learned pretty early on just to be quiet, take notes, and let them, as I was saying before, feel heard. And something that was a consistent thread to what you were saying was that element of humanizing it too. Like, we're not here as, we're not AI bots that are here to drop the hammer on kids. Like we very much want them to be better as a consequence of their experiences here. I was an elementary school principal for 6 years, and elementary school kids, much like middle school kids, make a lot of mistakes. They make decisions that are inadvisable. Good. It's what they're supposed to do. It's how we learn. They're constantly figuring out where the borderline is by pushing us close to it and sometimes crossing over. But that's how they learn, to me, the parameters of a social existence. And what I used to remind parents in some of the conversations was, good that they get that out of their system here. So yeah, there's a consequence for it. They don't like it. They don't want to be in my office for 10 minutes, but get it out of their system now, because if they do this when they're in high school or beyond, the consequences tend to be a lot more daunting and perhaps long lasting. And I see middle school as the natural, obvious middle ground for that. But if a student messes up on some level here, address it, look for them to learn from it and get better. And you want that teamwork element with the families as well. I'm noticing the Giant stuff. I don't know if Mr. Seborowski put you up to that. Like, if I find out later that you're like a Broncos fan, but you just put that in here to antagonize the Patriots
it's sprinkled around the room a little bit.
All right, I'm gonna double check the bio to make sure if you really are a Giants fan and not just trying to stick it to me. But nevertheless, but I think I like what you're saying, and the uncomfortable conversations are sometimes the most important ones to have. Yeah. And sometimes people have to get stuff out that they're frustrated about. You listen, you don't take it personally, take notes on it, and just always focus on how can we be better as a result of this.
Yeah, and a couple of components on the student side, and I'm excited to have these conversations too with some of our families. Is when we're in these situations, we have these challenging conversations. A mistake maybe has been made. There's the ownership component to it. Yep. There's the honesty component to it, the growth, and within that growth too, I think what is so important is like, okay, what's the restitution? Like now, we've recognized the error. Sure, it's easy to have a disciplinary action in place, but coupled with that and partnered with that is, okay, well, how do you make this right now?
Yeah.
Right. What's the plan? Who's been impacted by this situation? Who are the parties involved in this? Now, what are the healthy things that you could do to sort of rectify and bring some levels of restitution to it? So those are some things that I'm having some small conversations with our kids about. And I'm excited to continue to expand that, and then also kind of get the families buy-in too with that process.
Good. Yeah, and it's an early chemistry lesson. For every action, there's a reaction, and we just try to limit the explosiveness of it. So I never taught chemistry, so I'm kind of happy that as an English teacher I just came up with that. But it sounds like you've had a great almost first full month here. Yeah. And hey, listen, you make it to Saturday, you're already in your second month. That's February.
That's a big deal.
Yeah, we're filming on Tuesday the 28th of January. But we're so happy to have you here.
Thank you.
Even with all the Giants paraphernalia, which it is local, so I gotta let it fly. But looking forward to continuing these conversations with or without the video side of things, and appreciate your willingness to be one of our guests for this.
All right, I appreciate the opportunity.
Excellent, and as always, thank you to our good friend Mrs. Noon, who will very soon be welcoming her second child, and we're very excited for her. And I don't know how many more of these she's going to be a part of until she goes out, but we appreciate all your work and look forward to having you back soon enough. Anyway, thank you very much for tuning in. I hope this proved to be informative and at least somewhat entertaining, and we'll definitely see you for the next one.